600 pounds of muscle, and first silently circled the crumpled figure sprawled across the rocky terrain. The grizzly bear sniffed at the unconscious man's uniform, now soaked with blood from a gash above his temple. A second massive bear emerged from the treeline, then a third, surrounding Park Ranger Mark Stevens, who lay completely unaware of the deadly predators now inches from his vulnerable body. The gathering of apex predators around an injured human should have ended in tragedy, nature's brutal law at work. But in the heart of Yellowstone National Park, on that autumn morning, something occurred that would shake the foundations of wildlife science and forever change our understanding of these magnificent creatures. Yellowstone spans over 2 million acres of wilderness, a crown jewel of America's national parks. Home to countless species, none command more respect and fear than the grizzly bear population that roams its mountains and valleys. The park's ecosystem thrives on delicate balances, with rangers like Mark Stevens working tirelessly to maintain harmony between wilderness and the millions who visit each year. At 42, Mark had spent 19 years patrolling Yellowstone's most remote territories. His colleagues regarded him as the foremost expert on grizzly behavior in the region. He could identify individual bears by their tracks alone and had mapped the territories of 12 different grizzly families across the northern range. Mark's renowned lectures on bear safety had saved countless lives, teaching respect rather than fear of these intelligent creatures. His connection with Yellowstone's wildlife transcended typical understanding. Mark had documented bears' seasonal migrations, feeding patterns, and social behaviors that contradicted textbook knowledge. He often said that bears possessed wisdom humans had forgotten, an intuitive understanding of the natural world that modern society had abandoned generations ago. Little did he know that this intuition would soon manifest in ways no wildlife expert could have predicted. The September morning began like countless others for Mark Stevens. He packed his weathered backpack with supplies for a 3-day backcountry patrol in Yellowstone's northeast quadrant. This remote section of the park featured rugged terrain rarely seen by tourists but frequented by some of the park's most elusive wildlife. Recent reports indicated increased grizzly activity in the area, with several hikers reporting brief encounters at greater distances than usual. Mark intended to investigate these behavioral changes and update the park's wildlife movement maps. The patrol route took him through dense pine forests that occasionally opened into small meadows bursting with late-season wildflowers. By midday, Mark had covered nearly 11 miles, meticulously documenting animal signs and taking soil samples near a stream where bears had been fishing. The September air carried the first hints of autumn crispness, though the afternoon sun still warmed the landscape. As the afternoon progressed, Mark veered off the established trail toward a rocky outcropping overlooking Specimen Ridge. This vantage point would allow him to survey the valley below for bear activity. The path grew increasingly treacherous as he climbed higher, with loose shale covering steeper portions of the hillside. Mark moved carefully, his experienced boots finding secure footing on the unstable surface. Just 50 yards from the summit, disaster struck without warning. A seemingly solid rock shifted beneath his weight, triggering a cascade of stones and debris. Mark lost his balance instantly. His arms flailed for purchase as the ground disappeared beneath him. The ranger tumbled violently down the rocky slope, his body bouncing against jagged stones. His radio smashed against rock, shattering into useless pieces. A sharp outcropping caught his temple with stunning force, immediately rendering him unconscious. Mark's body came to rest in a small depression nearly 70 feet below the trail. Blood flowed freely from the gash above his eye, soaking into the earth around him. His left leg twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. His breathing remained shallow but steady as he lay completely vulnerable in one of the most dangerous wildlife corridors in North America. The afternoon sun continued its westward journey as Mark remained motionless. His scheduled check-in with Ranger headquarters had been set for 6 p.m. With his radio destroyed and his satellite phone buried somewhere in the rockslide, no call would come. Search procedures wouldn't activate until morning, leaving Mark alone through the approaching night. As shadows lengthened across the landscape, the temperature began its rapid descent. At this elevation, nighttime temperatures could drop below freezing even in September. Mark's unconscious form offered no resistance to the encroaching cold. His exposed skin already showed signs of cooling as precious body heat escaped into the mountain air. Worse still, the scent of human blood traveled on the breeze through the valley. In this remote sector of the park, this particular scent rarely registered, making it all the more noticeable to the keen senses of the wilderness predators. As darkness approached, something stirred in the forest below. Multiple somethings, moving with purpose toward the source of blood in their territory. The first indication of movement came from the eastern tree line as the sun dipped behind the mountains. A massive grizzly emerged from the forest shadows, nose tilted upward, sampling the cooling air. This was Thunderpaw, a dominant male weighing over 800 pounds, with a distinctive scar running across his right shoulder blade. Territorial and typically solitary, he moved with deliberate purpose toward the unconscious ranger. The unmistakable scent of human blood had triggered something primal in his brain. Thunderpaw approached with caution, circling Mark's motionless form from 20 feet away. His powerful snout worked continuously, processing information about the injured human. The bear moved closer, massive paws silent against the rocky ground despite his enormous weight. At 10 feet away, he paused, rising briefly to his full height of nearly 9 feet to survey the surroundings before dropping back to all fours. From the northern slope, a mother grizzly and her 2 adolescent cubs appeared. Known to researchers as Sierra, she was recognizable by her cinnamon-colored throat patch. Sierra normally avoided areas with human scent, keeping her cubs far from potential danger. Yet something about this situation drew her forward, despite her protective instincts. The cubs followed closely, their curiosity evident as they caught the strange scent cocktail of blood, sweat, and the synthetic materials of Mark's uniform. Thunderpaw acknowledged their presence with a low grunt, but made no aggressive move. This unusual tolerance between competing bears created an atmosphere of strange collaboration rather than the territorial dispute that would normally occur. Sierra positioned herself and her cubs on the opposite side of Mark, effectively creating a perimeter around the ranger. As twilight deepened into dusk, movement from the western ridge revealed another arrival. This bear moved with a distinctive limp, the result of a confrontation with a bull elk years earlier. Park biologists called him Old Scar, a male past his prime, but still commanding respect among the bear population. He approached from downwind, testing the air repeatedly before joining the gathering. Old Scar took position at Mark's feet, completing a triangle formation around the ranger. The gathering defied normal grizzly behavior. These solitary creatures rarely tolerated each other's presence, yet here they remained, forming an ever-tightening circle around Mark's unconscious body. Their massive forms created shadows that stretched across the ground in the fading light, surrounding the vulnerable human like sentinels. More movement rustled through the underbrush as 2 younger male grizzlies emerged tentatively from different directions. These brothers, not yet full-grown but already weighing over 500 pounds each, approached with evident caution. They seemed to understand the unusual hierarchy forming around the ranger. Without challenging the established bears, they integrated themselves into the gathering, widening the circle but maintaining the protective formation. As night fully enveloped the landscape, 7 grizzly bears surrounded Mark Stevens. Their breath created small clouds of vapor in the increasingly cold mountain air. Occasionally, one would approach closer, sniffing at Mark's wounds or clothing before returning to position. Their behavior contradicted everything wildlife biology understood about grizzly interactions with injured creatures. The moon rose over the eastern mountains, illuminating the extraordinary scene. 7 of nature's most feared predators had formed a ring around an unconscious human. Any wilderness expert witnessing this gathering would have predicted imminent tragedy. These apex predators, driven by instinct and hunger, should have seen Mark as nothing more than vulnerable prey. Yet minute after minute passed without aggression. Something unprecedented was unfolding in the moonlight, something that would challenge humanity's understanding of these creatures forever. The mountain night grew bitterly cold as clouds obscured the moon. Temperature dropped rapidly, the kind of dangerous cold that could claim an exposed human life within hours. Mark Stevens remained unconscious, his body temperature falling dangerously as blood continued seeping from his head wound. In normal circumstances, these conditions alone would have proven fatal before morning. Thunderpaw, the massive dominant male, suddenly rose from his position and approached Mark directly. His enormous form loomed over the ranger, casting a shadow across the injured man. The bear lowered his head, sniffing intently at the wound. The other bears watched motionless, as if waiting for a signal. Then, in a behavior that defied all natural instinct, Thunderpaw carefully positioned his massive body alongside Mark's, pressing his warm fur against the ranger's cold form. Sierra, the mother bear, seemed to understand this signal. She moved her considerable bulk to Mark's other side, her body heat creating a cocoon of warmth around the human. Her cubs initially appeared confused by this behavior, but soon mimicked their mother, pressing close to Mark's legs. Old Scar maintained his position at Mark's feet, effectively blocking the cold wind that whistled through the rocks. The bears' massive bodies formed a living barrier against the deadly mountain cold. Their combined body heat created a microclimate around Mark that kept his core temperature from falling to lethal levels. Periodically, Thunderpaw would raise his head, scanning the darkness, alert to potential threats. Near midnight, that vigilance proved necessary. The haunting howl of a wolf pack echoed across the valley. The predators had caught the scent of blood and vulnerability. Within 20 minutes, yellow eyes reflected moonlight at the perimeter of the small clearing where Mark lay protected. The wolves approached cautiously, confused by the unprecedented sight of multiple grizzlies gathered around a human. Thunderpaw rose to his full height, a mountain of muscle and fur, and released a roar that reverberated across the landscape. The message required no translation. This human was under protection. The other adult bears stood their ground, forming an impenetrable wall between Mark and the wolf pack. Sierra positioned her cubs behind her massive frame, but maintained her place in the protective circle. The standoff continued for nearly an hour. The wolves circled, searching for weakness in the bears' defense, finding none. Eventually, the pack melted back into the forest, seeking easier prey. The bears settled back into their positions around Mark, whose breathing had stabilized thanks to their shared warmth. Throughout the night, the bears took turns maintaining vigilance. When a mountain lion's screech announced another predator's interest, Old Scar and one of the younger males moved toward the sound, driving the cougar away before it could approach. The protective behavior extended beyond passive warming. The bears actively defended Mark from all potential threats. As dawn approached, Mark stirred slightly, moaning in pain though not regaining consciousness. The sound triggered an immediate response from Sierra, who gently nudged his shoulder with her snout, as she might do to comfort her cubs. The gesture carried an almost maternal gentleness that contradicted everything known about wild grizzly behavior toward humans. Morning brought new challenges as the bears faced a decision. Typically, daylight would drive them to separate feeding grounds or day beds. Instead, they maintained their positions as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Thunderpaw occasionally left the circle to patrol the perimeter before returning to his position beside Mark. The bears appeared committed to their inexplicable guardianship. Most remarkable was their careful attention to Mark's injuries. When blood occasionally bubbled from his head wound, Sierra would delicately lick it clean, applying pressure with her tongue that inadvertently helped slow the bleeding. This grooming behavior, normally reserved for cubs, seemed to be instinctively extended to the vulnerable human. The sun climbed higher, warming the landscape, yet the bears showed no sign of abandoning their vigil. They adjusted positions to provide shade rather than warmth as the temperature rose. Occasionally they would take turns visiting a nearby stream for water, but the protective circle never fully disbanded. Something beyond scientific understanding bound these powerful creatures to the unconscious ranger throughout the long night and into the following day, a phenomenon that would soon astonish the human world. By mid-morning, Yellowstone's emergency protocols had activated. Mark's failure to check and had triggered standard search and rescue procedures. A helicopter team took flight at first light, scanning Mark's planned route, while a ground team led by Senior Ranger Sarah Collins followed the trail markers on his last known path. Sarah had worked with Mark for over 12 years. She knew his habits, his thoroughness, his almost supernatural connection with the park's wildlife. Her worry grew with each passing hour as radio calls revealed no sign of her colleague. Reaching the rocky outcropping where Mark had planned his survey, Sarah spotted disturbed shale and followed it to the edge of a steep slope. Through binoculars, she spotted something that made her blood freeze. At the bottom of the ravine lay what appeared to be a ranger uniform, surrounded by massive brown forms. Bears. Multiple grizzlies. Sarah's heart sank as she counted 7 bears around what she now confirmed was Mark's motionless body. "Base, we've located Ranger Stevens," she radioed, voice tight with emotion. "Ravine location matches coordinates I'm sending now. He appears down, unconscious or worse. There's a situation with multiple bears on scene. Request immediate air support and wildlife management team." The helicopter that had been scanning the eastern sector changed course immediately. Within 11 minutes, it hovered above the ravine, giving the search team their first clear view of the unprecedented scene below. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, confusion evident in his tone. "You're not going to believe this. The bears, they're not attacking him. They're surrounding him in some kind of formation." The team watched through zoom lenses as the helicopter's noise caused the bears to look upward. Rather than fleeing, as would be typical behavior, the grizzlies maintained their positions around Mark. The largest bear, Thunder Paw, stood over Mark's body in what appeared to be a protective stance. Wildlife biologist Dr. Elena Rodriguez, part of the search team, stared in disbelief at the scene. "This is impossible," she whispered. "They're protecting him. Those bears spent the night guarding him, not hunting him." Evidence supported her astonishing conclusion. The ground around Mark showed signs of other predators having approached, but no indication they had gotten close to the ranger. The protective circle of bears had kept all threats at bay throughout the night. The rescue now faced an unprecedented challenge: how to extract an injured man from the midst of 7 wild grizzlies without harming either. Standard protocol would involve tranquilizing the bears, but Dr. Rodriguez urgently advised against it. "If we dart them, we could trigger defensive aggression. These bears have chosen to protect him for reasons we don't understand. We need to work with this miracle, not against it." The team developed an impromptu strategy, using the helicopter to create distance without landing directly over the scene. 2 medics would approach slowly, non-threateningly, while wildlife experts monitored the bears' reactions. If aggression occurred, the team would retreat immediately. As the first medic took cautious steps toward the circle of bears, something remarkable happened. Thunder Paw, the dominant male, backed away slightly, creating a narrow corridor to Mark while maintaining his protective posture. It was as if the massive predator understood the humans had come to help, not harm. The emergency medical team rushed Mark Stevens to Yellowstone's primary medical facility before airlifting him to Bozeman's Regional Trauma Center. His condition remained critical. Multiple fractures, severe concussion, blood loss, and exposure presented a dangerous combination. The attending physicians prepared the surgical team while ordering a full battery of tests to assess internal damage. Dr. Renee Wilson, the lead trauma specialist, examined Mark's core body temperature with growing confusion. Despite spending nearly 18 hours exposed to mountain conditions that had dropped well below freezing overnight, his core temperature registered at only 2 degrees below normal. For a patient with his blood loss and injuries, this defied medical explanation. "His condition doesn't match the exposure time," Dr. Wilson explained to the medical team. "Someone in his situation should be presenting with severe hypothermia, possibly organ failure. Instead, it's as if he spent the night with consistent heating." Further examination revealed more puzzles. Mark's wounds, while serious, showed signs of rudimentary cleaning. The head laceration had partially clotted in a pattern unlike typical wound healing. Trace evidence found in the wound included an unexpected substance that lab tests later identified as bear saliva containing natural antibacterial properties. This inadvertent treatment had prevented infection that would typically develop in wilderness injuries. 3 days after rescue, Mark began showing signs of consciousness. His eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on nothing before closing again. By the 5th day, he managed to stay awake for 30-minute intervals. During one of these periods of consciousness, Sarah Collins gently explained what they had discovered. "Mark, something incredible happened out there. The bears protected you. They kept you warm through the night. They kept other predators away. The doctors say that without their body heat, you wouldn't have survived." Mark's expression showed disbelief, followed by dawning wonder. When strong enough to speak, his first words came as a whisper. "Thunderpaw. Was he there?" Sarah nodded, amazed that Mark recognized the bear. The big male with the shoulder scar? He seemed to be leading the others. Mark closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "Years ago, I found him as a cub Mother poached. I helped relocate him instead of euthanizing. Never thought he'd remember." As Mark's strength gradually returned, wildlife biologists conducted extensive interviews, documenting every detail of his relationship with Yellowstone's bear population. His decades of respectful interaction, his unique approach to wildlife management, had created something unprecedented, a mutual respect that transcended natural boundaries. The events in Yellowstone sent shockwaves through the wildlife research community worldwide. Leading experts in animal behavior gathered in Montana to interview Mark and review the extensive documentation of the rescue. The incident challenged fundamental assumptions about predator behavior and animal cognition that had stood for generations. Dr. Miyako Tanaka, the renowned animal cognition specialist from Tokyo University, published the first comprehensive analysis of what the media had dubbed the Yellowstone miracle. Her paper proposed that grizzly bears possessed significantly higher levels of emotional intelligence and memory than previously understood. She specifically highlighted the apparent recognition factor, that Thunderpaw had remembered a human who had shown compassion years earlier. What we witnessed represents a paradigm shift in our understanding of wildlife cognition, Dr. Tanaka concluded. These bears demonstrated empathy, cooperation, and decision-making that suggests a level of emotional processing we previously attributed only to humans and certain primates. Conservation policies throughout North America began shifting in response. The incident provided powerful evidence for more humane bear management protocols. Several parks implemented new training programs based on Mark's relationship-centered approach to wildlife interaction. 6 months after his rescue, having recovered enough to return to limited duty, Mark Stevens visited the ravine where his life had been saved. Park officials had established an observation-only zone in the area to prevent tourist interference while allowing research to continue. As Mark stood silently at the ridge overlooking the site, a familiar form emerged from the treeline below. Thunderpaw paused at the forest edge, nose raised toward Mark's position. For long moments, bear and man regarded each other across the distance. The massive grizzly made no aggressive move, simply acknowledging the ranger's presence before slowly turning back toward the forest depths. The incident had forever altered humanity's perception of these magnificent creatures. In their protection of a vulnerable human, the bears had revealed something profound about the natural world, that compassion might be a universal language, transcending species boundaries in ways science was only beginning to understand.